Hello, hello, everybody. We're seeing you guys pool in. Thank you so much for joining. Feel free to drop in the chat where you guys are tuning in from, if you're excited for all of the amazing information that we're going to share today. And we're just going to give a little bit of time for everybody to kind of join in, and then we'll get started. All right, one more minute. I'm gonna get started right at 1:05 just because I like things like that. So I'll get started right at 1:05 and we'll be good to go. Yeah, tuning in from Denver. Welcome, Mark. Yeah, New Jersey, right down the road. I'm here in Baltimore, so not too far. All right, we're right at 1:05. So hello, everybody, and welcome to today's In Session, Activism and the Arts. I am Kristen B. I will be your host for today. We're going to cover the power that lies within the creative community to inspire change, how these efforts can align with your brand, and strategies to collaborate with organizations and causes that you're passionate about. So today, I'm excited to be joined by some amazing panelists, Easy Jackson, Tina Matthew, Jessica George, and Erica Johnson. Easy, let's start with you. Can you just share your preferred gender pronouns and a bit about yourself?
Easy Jackson, he, him. I'm a rapper, activist, singer-songwriter.
Amazing, amazing. just gonna go around my screen. Jessica.
Hey y'all, I'm Jess George. I'm tuning in from Louisville, Kentucky, and I have worked with in nonprofits sort of my whole life, working for progressive change here in Kentucky, and then started working with musicians and helped them, partnering with musicians to help us sort of expand our base and further our goals, and then worked for a national organization helping musicians make an impact around things that they care about through like specific strategies, like helping to implement ticket add-ons or special merch items, or other ways of like coordinating with nonprofits to help sort of translate both of those worlds for nonprofits and for musicians. So I'm excited to be here. I love very much working with artists who particularly are emerging artists or have fan bases that they have a deep connection with, because I think there's super impact that can happen there. So I'm really excited to be here. And that's all I'll say for now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jessica. And next on my screen is Erica.
Okay, so I'm Erica Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm currently a graduate student at North Carolina Central University, located in Durham, North Carolina. I am the Alumni Fellow for a Common Cause, and that's a nonpartisan grassroots organization that kind of focuses on making sure people are allowed to go through, or not allowed necessarily, but that they can properly go through this process of voting and understanding the importance of voting rights. And I'm really excited to be here.
Wonderful. Great to have you. And Tina.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Tina Matthew, she, her. I am a singer-songwriter and activist from Los Angeles. Well, not from Los Angeles, but I live in Los Angeles now. And I mostly work with gun violence prevention organizations like Everytown, Moms Demand Action, March for Our Lives, Brady Campaign. I've also worked with Next Gen for voter registration initiatives. And yeah, I'm super excited to talk to other artists and other people that are wanting to get on board with doing this kind of work and help people figure out how to do that, because it's actually not that hard.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to you all. Super grateful to have you here on this panel. And just in case you guys didn't know, this is a powerhouse panel. So super excited for this. And just a bit of information before we dive in. We've gotten a lot of great input from our attendees for some content and questions. So thank you for everybody who submitted ahead of time with your questions. We'll be covering a lot of topics related to activism in the arts for the first 45 minutes of the session, and then we'll leave time at the end for open Q&A. So with that said, this space is a supportive and uplifting space. So we want to keep all the dialogue in the chat and in the Q&A as respectful as possible as we get into this discussion. Also, please feel free to use the chat, like we said in the beginning, to let us know where you're from, what's resonating with you, anything that you agree with, things like that. But make sure that you choose all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your comments. And then for your questions specifically, there is a Q&A function at the bottom. So you can feel free to submit any questions that you have using the Q&A. And then we're gonna have a moderator looking in there to feed us those questions so that we can answer as many as we can towards the end of the discussion. And you'll also receive a short survey at the very end of this webinar, just to let us know your feelings, any other topics that you'd like us to cover for any future in sessions, and just any general feedback. So with all of the housekeeping items out of the way, we're ready to dive in. So let's start, from the very basics. Activism can mean a lot to different people. So, in your opinion, what does activism mean to you? And we can start with Tina, since we ended with Tina.
Sure, I think you're right. Activism means a lot of things. So I think that activism is kind of an umbrella, right? So volunteering, writing postcards, phone banking, signing people up for voter registration, that's a form of activism. And then there's also like more demonstrative activism, right? Where there's marching in the streets or going to rallies. My preferred, actually I do a little bit of both, but for me, performing and speaking at events is my form of activism. But yeah, activism is an umbrella for sure.
Feel free to chime in if anyone else has any additions or what it means to them.
I could keep talking.
Or things that they like to do, or what they kind of gravitate toward.
Yeah, I think it's anything that you do that it goes out of your ordinary day to day. I think people put a large title, or it seems like this huge thing that should take up a lot of your time. But I think when ordinary people have always done extraordinary things, especially when they bring their voices together. So, if anything that you're doing outside of your daily schedule, you change something, I think is activism.
I love that. Ordinary people do extraordinary things. Easy, I need that on a shirt. So if you haven't gotten it already, please. I need that. That really hit home. And that kind of goes directly into one of the next questions that we have is, do artists have to label themselves as an activist to participate in or support various causes? Because that can be a heavy thing to label yourself as if you don't feel like you deserve, quote unquote, that label. So do they have to do that in order to even begin being a part of this change?
I mean, I don't think so. I think it's actually when you label yourself as an activist, it comes with personally speaking, it comes with a little bit of pressure of well, now I'm an activist. I have to have an opinion about everything publicly. I'm trying to understand that that's not the case. You don't have to be an activist to play a gig for a fundraiser. You're just a person who sees the greater good of using your art for something positive. No, you definitely do not need to label yourself as an activist to do activist work.
Amazing.
Take the pressure off.
Yeah, definitely. And Erica, I know with Common Cause and organizations like that, do you feel like organizations look to specific artists that have labeled themselves as activists to partner with or to ask them to be a part of certain things, or are they just looking for artists that have music that kind of align with their mission?
Yeah, so I think that kind of like what Tina said, that you don't have to have that label, and I think that organizations, just grassroots organizations, want people that, hey, this is what we believe in, this is what we want. And so I think it's, it's important to align with the mission and the values, because if this is what the organization is about, then it's important that that person understands that this is something serious. And so activism it's an action word. Like, it doesn't have to be a large, me marching in the streets, me rallying, but it can be small, and those small things can enact the same change as those larger things. But it's just important about making that an action word and not just attaching that to who you are, but actually doing the work behind it.
Love that. And that actually segues these. I mean, you guys have some perfect answers that segue directly into the next question. With acting on these things, with putting these words into action, how have you seen artists do it in a creative way, even beyond, just raising funds or things like that? Like, how have you seen artists use their platform in creative ways?
I think, and I can jump in here, I think that a lot of times organizations really do limit their asks to artists to help raise money. Like and in some ways it's like because that's what they've seen happen before. But to me, I consider musicians and artists sort of translators, because like you guys know how to talk to your fans and you know how to have conversations. And in some ways, what I have found as, with a nonprofit, I have found that sometimes artists, even just talking about an issue, creates sort of cultural cover, right? So like an organization might seem like kind of extreme and sort of activisty, but then when those same ideas come through a different channel for a person, it all of a sudden is like, well, that's not so radical. Like maybe that isn't so weird that everyone should be able to vote without intimidation. Like, so in some ways, even just talking about an issue and sort of working with your fans to like understand it together, like, and recognize like there's a process to understanding like the details around an issue, that is a form of activism that shifts culture, which is actually what we have to do on a lot of different fronts. So I would say that like, it is great to raise money for an organization, but if it ends there, it almost sometimes can feel extractive, like that it's like, okay, call me when you've got to raise some funds, and then just you're out, like we're out, like that's it. So I think that really those, like every little bit is important.
And I was thinking too, like, I know this is, mostly geared towards artists in a musician sense, but like a lot of people use like visual art, spoken word to make statements, right? Like a lot of, when you see, Black Lives Matter painted on, the street, that's art, right? That's an artistic way of like making a statement. And so, that should be recognized as well as, an artistic expression of activism.
Yeah, I think musically, one of my favorite things recently, especially with everything that's going on in terms of police brutality and everything, is seeing mainstream artists who don't normally, especially in hip hop, don't normally address these issues, like Lil Baby and people like that coming out and talking about stuff. I think that's been one of my favorite recent things, because we all know like mainstream artists are kind of steered away from speaking on issues, and record labels tend to not put funding behind videos for things that have protest anthems to them, you know what I mean? So I've really enjoyed seeing that. I've enjoyed seeing those teams like stand behind them and really market those songs like they would market any twerk song, you know what I'm saying? It's been dope.
And one other thing I can add is like bringing it kind of down to like almost like a community level, like beyond raising money. Like I sing for gun violence vigils. Like that's not raising money. That's like soothing people who have gone through a terrible experience. And in doing so, I still partner with, specific organizations that are holding the vigils. But we're not raising money, we're comforting each other, right? Which is a part of all of this too. Or there was like a Moms Demand Action was doing like a phone banking thing for candidates, which I guess that is raising money, but my goal wasn't raising money. I came onto the virtual phone banking group to sing a song and like pep them up before they like went out into the world to like make their very awkward phone calls, you know? So I think there's other things that like artists can do and like kind of be pieces in the puzzle that aren't necessarily like, I'm here to raise the money for you. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the combination of what you all said, kind of like thinking outside of the box in a way and thinking in a more simplistic way, where like sometimes you overthink what does it mean to be active? What does it mean to be an activist when, you know, just speaking your truth or speaking how you feel about a subject with the people who are already listening to you and value your opinion and want to hear what you have to say, you know, is a form of activism. And it's something that, you know, sometimes we do in general, like when you talk about your favorite lipstick or your favorite piece of jewelry, you know, just shifting it into something that can help impact some change. And easy, kind of piggybacking off of what you were saying, we've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement how the youth are passionate and so ready to take action for what they believe in. How can artists collaborate with them and support them in general now and beyond? Like how can we support the youth that are really on fire right now, ready to make some things happen?
I mean, I think in any way you can, right? There are groups everywhere where we live, you know what I mean, that are doing stuff. I think paying attention, not just, assuming that they don't have the support, checking in, seeing what kind of support they need first. I think a mistake that older artists and activists make a lot of times is not listening to younger people, you know what I mean? Just coming in and kind of, trying to tell them how to do it. When in all actuality, like things are changing so much that, they know ways to get stuff out there that we've never known or would never know if we don't shut up. You know what I mean? So I think I think you gotta listen to young people first and foremost, and they'll always let you know how you can support them and what they actually need.
Perfect advice. Listen, you can absorb a lot of information and be of best service, you know?
Right.
I would also say that, locally and nationally, the demands are very clear. Like there's really not a super big question about what the request is. Like this movement is so coordinated, it's so precise, it's so clear. And I think that like becoming familiar with what are the demands, and if you have a question about a demand, you might need more information actually. So I think really looking at that and then figuring out like how can I help bring my people along and follow through with some of these demands, because it's not just demands of like city officials, it's going to take people, all of us sort of following that lead. And so I think like becoming familiar with the demands and figuring out how you can bring yourself along and then bring your people with you.
Awesome. So like doing your own research and then figuring out how you can best use what you have to support what's already needed. Yeah, definitely. Did you have something you wanted to share, Erica? I feel like
Yes,
you did. Okay.
yeah. So I guess being like a young person, I'm 23, youngish person. I think about what kind of like what Easy was saying, like what I was able to do when given the opportunity to lead, and like having people on my campus to listen to my ideas when it came to like voter registration and voter education, and like what I wanted to do to like just energize young people like about voting and about activism, and like what, activism that isn't performative looks like what real activism looks like. And so, we were able to march to the polls. We were able to, increase our numbers when it came to voting and voter registration. We were able to like win awards and receive that excitement again that we once had, because, when we, in 2018, the last election that Elizabeth City State had, where a lot of students turned out, was the election in 20, hold on, let me think. I guess 2008 when President Obama was elected the first time, and that's when like big numbers came out. And then of course 4 years after that, another like large number of students came out, but they noticed like a real drop in 2016. And so when I came to Elizabeth City, I was like, hey, like what can we do? And so working with admin and working with like older people, that were like, hey, we're here to listen, that really helps me realize that like there are people that want to listen to our idea, but it's just about making sure that everybody's in the room on the same page and figuring out like what we can do to best help everyone in navigating this. So
Totally, love that. It's all about being on the same page. We can all have the best intentions, but without any real plan and a collaborative effort, we'll be, moving in circles toward the same thing, but moving nowhere. So totally duly noted, taking notes, really. And that kind of goes into, that is kind of one response to what I'm going to ask, but what are some of the barriers that you've seen artists encounter that prevent them from engaging with their fans and communities in this way? So they have it kind of in their hearts, but what are some of the things that you see that kind of stop them from actually putting it into action?
I mean, I'll say, here's the deal. Once you start speaking up about something you're passionate about, you might lose fans. That's just going to be part of it. And like, you have to be in a position to be like, okay, because on the flip side of that, you are also going to gain a like-minded audience. So you'll catch flack. Like I had plenty of people unfollow me when I started talking about gun violence, and then coming into my DMs with all these like crazy weird threats or whatever, and it's like, okay, like I recognize that that's part of it because I'm speaking up. But the amount of people that support me now that I never knew before I started speaking up about causes is so worth it. So I'll say that.
I think a big barrier for a lot of artists too is like your own willingness to learn and be open, especially when you're engaging with your fan base. Like I know recently when Nick Cannon like came out with like the anti-Semitic stuff, right? I did not really see what was wrong with what he was saying at first. But then it was like some of my fans and followers that were like, I'm surprised you feel this way. I would never think that you would think like this. And then I ended up having some like really in-depth discussions from Jewish people who were like, bro, breaking stuff down to me that I didn't know. You know what I mean? And I realized in that process, like, oh, I had been raised a certain way with a certain mentality and a certain thought that, and I didn't think I was anti-Semitic, but the whole time, like these were anti-Semitic teachings that I had. And so for me, that was awesome. You know what I mean? Because you get to a certain age and I think a lot of times adults get to a certain age and they don't think that they can learn new stuff, or that, everything they've always thought is just the way it is and the way it should be and the way it always should be. And change is uncomfortable. And I think that's a big barrier for a lot of artists and just people in general engaging in anything. A lot of times people come with a certain level of education that limits them from further education. You know what I mean? I think it's important for our fans to see us ever evolving, ever growing, ever changing, because they can relate to that and it can sustain their relationship with us.
Totally love that. Always be open, because information is changing. Your access to information, who's in your circle that's sharing new things with you that you didn't know. Or your perspective changes, as you have different experiences. How you look at one situation today may not be how you look at it tomorrow. So
Right.
Being open and, having that open dialogue with your fans so that they're not, holding you in a box either, so that, can definitely be a barrier. So
Right.
I love that. And I guess that, oh, go ahead, Jess. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do think like what we're saying, I do think it's been my experience that people's biggest nervousness is backlash, like just exactly what we're talking about. And the one thing that I would just say about that is that it is true, it is real, but like, do what you can to find your political home. And what I mean by that is like, find your people, like find the organizations or find the people that are doing work around issues that like is a deep passion of yours, and and if you can find your political home, and what I mean by that is like you like attach to an organization, like sign up, open the emails, click the links, like dedicate yourself to sort of learning more about the issues that they're working on and like how they're looking at it and talking about it. And the other truth is like now more than any other time, and in the past and probably in the future, everything is online, right? So like you actually have more, potentially more time and more access to trainings. Like a lot of this stuff with like nonprofits would be like trainings off site. Well, now it's all online. Like, and there, so much of this stuff is more accessible than it ever has been. And so if you can sort of find your political home, you actually also can do more learning and more relation and build more relationships from where you are. And I really recommend that because it's really hard to go alone. And it's like, it's not going to help to just like, take big, bold steps all by yourself, but when you're in community and you're following movement, you actually won't be by yourself.
I love that. And again, an amazing segue into that understanding of like finding your why. And on a base level, that's a huge question before you even embark on what causes you're going to support. Just figuring out, what advice do you all have for artists that are in that position of like figuring out why this cause, why engage with my fan base and my community in this way, or even like, why do I have the gifts that I have? What advice do you have for someone kind of stuck in that space?
I would just say always like be open. Like being stuck in that space is more than likely a place of not being like open. You know what I mean? Because, I don't know, I feel like sometimes things are scary for people to, explore or try. And I think ever absorbing and always like being open, and you'll find it. Like you get it. I worked in politics and activism and organizing, community organizing for a decade. And I would treat my music like it was this whole other world. You know what I mean? Like I would get off work and I'd go to the studio or go to rehearsal, and it was like I was living two different lives. And then one day I was like, hey, all of this makes sense. I'm having the same conversations over here that I'm having over here. The same people that I'm in the studio with are talking about the very rally that I was at earlier today. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. So it happens organically. You just have to, I think, any artist that's struggling with it right now, just continue to be open and continue to explore like who you are. Why does this trigger me? Why am I upset about this? Those kind of questions you ask yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar in the sense that like there's so many things happening right now that get your blood boiling. It's like pick one. There's literally we could rattle them off for days. Just pick one. Whatever one really makes you upset the most, right? And then start there. And then other things might open up from there. But like pick one and go. There's so many.
I love that. And that is actually the next question I was going to ask, like, how do they get started right now? And you just said it, pick something that you are passionate, like you're emotionally driven right now in this very moment, and just start researching and start figuring out how you personally want to get involved.
Totally.
So you guys
And
answer the question.
Yeah, and there's like, if you're as a musician, right? Like you can decide, do I want to write about something? And then, and use my time in that way. Do I want to write about something? Do I want to speak my mind and put that out there? Do I want to volunteer my services as far as like playing gigs, right? And then there's a whole, like, you can choose to go the political route. If you don't want to go political, that's fine. There's different movements, right? If that's even feels too big, like there's the community route where you're just, how many people in your community right now are like standing at a line at a food bank, or, it's like, there's so many things to get involved with and put your energy towards. And so you don't have to be like, I'm going to be politically aligned with something publicly. Like, it doesn't have to be that, right? There's so many other ways to do it.
I love that. Start with the things that you feel aligns with you, and that kind of goes very nicely into brand alignment. So right now, I feel like brand is such a buzzy word right now, although it's always been a thing. But for artists specifically, like building your brand and things like that. And I know that there are some artists that are like, well, the brand that I've built isn't a political brand, or it isn't an activist based brand. So how can I, dive into this world or lend myself to it without it not aligning with my brand? Or what advice do you have for artists trying to align themselves with causes that they care about while also being cognizant of their brand?
I just feel like don't stress about it. You know what I mean? I mean, like Cardi B is having discussions about the presidential race right now. You know what I mean? Like I just feel like don't stress that. Like if your brand, as long as your brand and who you are is authentic, you know what I mean? Anything you want to speak on, it's like that's your authentic self. That's you. You know what I mean? It's not a whole lot of thought that you have to really put into it. You know what I mean? If I know that Cardi B is going to say something about police brutality and Young Thug is not, you know what I mean? I'm probably going to just go check out Cardi B. I'm not going to be like, oh, but she was just talking about WAP. And no, it doesn't matter. Like, like she's a person existing here with us right now too. So she has every right to speak on it as anybody else does. You know what I mean? I know people who light sage, burn frankincense, do all kind of peace stuff, and they still own a weapon. You know what I mean? And are adamant about being a licensed gun carrier. You know what I mean? Like everybody isn't a monolith. So I just think don't stress about it. Like just do you.
Amazing.
And to piggyback on that, I think when artists are so concerned with, listen, you want to obviously be aligned in some way with what if you're going to be doing an event for something and they promote something that's wildly against what you are for, then like that's obvious, right? But dang it, I lost my train of thought. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Thinking about like brand alignment and stuff, it's very like, that becomes very you focused, and it's kind of like not the point of what you're doing, right? It's just kind of not the point.
Right.
That makes total sense. And I think it's interesting because many of the webinars that we've had during COVID, it has kind of progressed into this space of being human and being vulnerable and being authentic. And that's kind of what people are really leaning into. They just want to know like who you are, what you think, what you feel truthfully. And like you, Easy and Tina said, speak on what you're going to speak on. And if it's truth and if it's authentic, let it be. At least you don't have this concern about, I aligned myself with this other organization because it matched my brand and I don't really believe it. So 2 weeks from now, when I say something I do believe in, it doesn't align. So as long as you're speaking from your truth, it always will come full circle and be exactly what you need it to be. So definitely grateful for that. And Erica, like when organizations are partnering when artists are looking to partner with organizations, what are some of the steps that they should take when reaching out? And everyone can kind of chime in as well, but Erica, specifically for Common Cause, how can artists get involved with that organization?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that like anyone should do is like researching the organization, because if you don't know anything about an organization, you're just trying to, hey, I want to like join a cause, like it's very performative because it's like you don't know what you're joining, you don't know what you're standing behind. But just like reaching out, I know that Common Cause always needs volunteers, and it takes nothing to sign up and say, hey, I want to volunteer my time, my service, I want to do this and that, for Common Cause or any organization, honestly. But I think the best thing to do is to research to make sure that this is something that I believe, or even if it's not something you specifically like are interested in, there's always room for you to share your talent. And it's always important to know, like, hey, if a majority of the people that support my music are feeling a certain type of way about this issue, well, let me look into the issue, and then let me look into an organization that is siding behind this issue. And again, like, we always need volunteers. We always space for you to offer up your talent and your time. So yeah.
I would also just say not every organization knows how to work with musicians. And like, and that's actually no problem, except like, I would just like, in some ways you can get involved and sort of follow their track, which might mean like go to meetings and like, you know, do phone banks and that sort of thing. And like become, you know, be a poll worker, or like turn out the vote or educate voters. Like, you know, there's like that route that like all volunteers can do. And then more and more organizations are recognizing like we have to understand the business model of music and understand the work that we need to do and sort of translate that. And so not every organization is in that zone. And sometimes you can find organizations that are in that zone because they're already working with artists. Like every town has a creative council. That's why, like, I don't know if that's why you, Tina, got involved with them, but they've invested a lot of money into understanding how to work with influencers, starting probably with Hollywood. And then, and most organizations have a sense of like, okay, we understand that influencers are important. And they sort of start with Hollywood in some ways. And like more and more, they're like working with musicians. And people have worked with musicians for a long time. So I don't mean to say that, but like, but it just like, I would just think about like, see what organizations have already done campaigns with artists, and maybe maybe that is a great place to start if you want to like be involved as a musician and not just as a volunteer kind of getting into their flow.
I'd say that also building relationships sort of on the ground level. So yeah, obviously like you could go through sort of the bigger channels. Okay, they have like a department that deals that. I personally didn't do it that way. What I did and what I have done with many of the organizations is, first of all, I get involved, and I can't say this across the board, but for most of them, I volunteer first as just a regular volunteer, just to see. That's the best way to know if you sort of align, right? Is like, I've stood on college campus and registered voters, or I've, volunteered with Moms Demand in every town. And so I do that kind of first, and you start building relationships within the organization. And then you're like, hey, by the way, I see you have a fundraiser happening on this day. I'm totally open to do that, and then you just start kind of building relationships from the inside, to the point where now, like, they're calling me to be like, hey, are you free this day? We have this thing happening and we need you to sing for it, and that's all for me. I went from the bottom and worked my way inside that way. And there's many ways to do it. That's just one example. And I feel like for people who have a smaller following, that they're not, an influencer. Like, I don't have, 1 million Instagram followers. I don't barely even have 5,000. And so I don't want to like discourage people, because sometimes with like in Every Town or some of these other like larger known things, they want bigger artists. They want people who have a draw, they're not kind of looking at like, it is kind of like, what can we get out of this, but how can we bring eyes? Like, are you an artist that can bring more eyes on us? And if you're not sort of at that level, there are still other ways to get involved. You don't just have to be like a famous influencer to use your art for good.
Amazing. And shout out to Mike for that question, and amazing answers for figuring out how to even get started. And kind of piggybacking off of that, and Erica, you were speaking about kind of vetting organizations before you choose to align with them. And Tina, you kind of spoke a bit about the answer to this question, but what recommendations do you have for artists that don't necessarily have a big team, or don't necessarily have a lot of time to like dive super deep into certain organizations? Do you have any advice for them when it comes to figuring out, if these organizations are legitimate, if they're actually giving, or supporting areas that they say they are, how can they ensure that the businesses or the organizations that they're aligning with are legitimate, if they don't have a specific person geared toward that on their team?
I can go ahead and go. So the biggest way, social media, everyone has it. We have time now that we're all quarantined and at home, and it's easy to go on these different organizations' social media and say like, oh, hey, like, okay, they're talking about this. Okay, they're focusing on this. So like, these are things that I believe. These are things that I see. You know, you don't. I think it is important, like Tina said, to go to events and to, you know, be a volunteer. Um, um, you know, and those things are important, but it's also important to, you know, just get the base. Like, did the organization, did they speak on things that you feel, you know, do they speak on things that you care about? And that's kind of how I kind of got involved in Common Cause, was because of that. You know, I was like, hey, you know, I think it's important college students should be able to vote. College student votes, you know, should be counted every single election. And I'm like, okay, this is something I care about. Well, let me follow their Instagram. And so, you know, that is the best way to me right now, specifically, to get involved and to figure out how this organization fits you in a short amount of time.
Amazing. Great insight. Perfect.
I would also just say sometimes people have questions about like the finances, like, oh, are they like, I think that I don't think that there's as much like misuse of finances in the nonprofit world as like sometimes people are like, well, that's not like, I don't really think that that's as prevalent as people might feel worried about. Like, I'm going to check their 990s to make sure that the way they're appropriating their funds is like less staff or more this thing, that thing. Is like, I would just really think about how much scrutiny you do for $25 that you spend other places. Like, you know, like some of that sort of vibe about like how are nonprofits spending their money is actually a way to sort of potentially keep you from like, is it like a barrier to keep you from getting involved? And it might possibly not have like the best origins. You know what I mean? It's like, let's all just kind of come together and just relax and like, you know.
And it's like totally hypocritical if you're like asking all of those questions for, like you said, $25 and then spending $100 at Walmart.
That's real.
Ain't it the truth?
Yeah. So kind of like, you know, the combination of Jess and
Yeah.
Erica, you know, and Tina, if you're going and you're participating in the events that they're having, you're getting to know the people who are running it, then you kind of have your answer right there. And if you're not in alignment with them, then you haven't really put your name in combination with what they do. You just gave your time, which isn't nothing, but you know, you kind of did your work there and
Totally.
got
And
involved
I
as well.
And I think like piggybacking off of something that Easy said about like being open, I think that's really important. I think it's also really important to know sort of what your hard no's are, right? So like an organization reached out to me to do a tour to go to like underprivileged, underserved areas to do free concerts. And it was a faith-based community, which I'm a person of faith, but there are certain things in certain faith-based communities that I am not aligned with, particularly, you know, politically and just on a human level. And so I did my due diligence and wrote them back. Thank you very much for the invitation. These are my hard no's. If these are things that you are aligned with, unfortunately, you know, and then the head of that organization called me and we spoke on the phone for an hour, a very candid conversation of what, you know, what I'm comfortable being aligned with and what I'm absolutely not comfortable being aligned with. So there's a little bit of, you know, due diligence that needs to be done. So whether that's like your team that's helping you with that, or if you're someone like me who you're looking at my team, you have those conversations yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Super important. Know yourself, know your boundaries, know what you're willing and not willing to do before you embark on some of these conversations. So love that. And shifting into voting specifically, as we're coming up on an election, this week is National Voter Education Week. So how can artists get involved and impact this particular election and, you know, moving forward? But right now, how can artists get involved?
Yeah, okay, so I can tackle that one. So there's a lot of ways that artists specifically, can get involved. And I wrote notes, so I'm gonna like read my notes and talk at the same time. And right now, Common Cause is mobilizing, thousands of volunteers, trying to ensure that every single vote and every single ballot that is casted counts. And so that's something really important. With this being a nonpartisan group, they're not specifically about a specific party. It's about making sure that everyone can participate in this process, and that's the main goal. Artists, I'm sorry, reading my notes. If you're interested in volunteering as an artist, you can go to protectthevote.net, and I can put that in the chat, or you can also participate in protection lines in case someone experiences an issue. So I know, like I spoke about before the call, about the voter suppression that myself and other students when I was in Elizabeth City experienced. We called the number and we let people know, like, hey, they're telling us that we're not registered, even though that we were. So they like clearly purged our voter registration forms. Hold on, let me keep reading. So you can also do the vote411.org with your bases, with your communities, with your fans. And they can view their sample ballots and see what candidates say about different issues. And that's something that's really important. When I was in Elizabeth City, we just did a town hall with all the different candidates in that specific county. Nothing partisan, but just allowing people to hear what these candidates have to say. You can sharing the social media accounts for these nonpartisan groups, if you prefer to stay nonpartisan, just about different things like, hey, in North Carolina, voter registration online ends tomorrow. And so, like, how can we make sure that my fan base is in North Carolina or in different states are aware that this ends tomorrow? And just different things like that. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. And Matt also, our moderator put some of the links in the chat as well, just in case anyone missed some of those. But
I would also just add one more thing, which is I know Common Cause is doing a lot of great work. There's also a new group called The Frontline, which is a collaboration between Working Families Party and Movement for Black Lives. And they are doing, it's a year-long process where right now they're doing the election defenders, which, we anticipate that there might be, we anticipate and we know that there's going to be intimidation at the polls. And one of the things that they're doing is they're organizing musicians. It's called Joy to the Polls, and they're organizing musicians to de-escalate at the polls, potentially by just maybe take your music and just maybe play a little bit of music, and just kind of encourage people to stay in the lines and do things like that. They also, with the election defenders, they are training people in de-escalation to help make sure that people feel safe as they're going to vote and do some de-escalation stuff. And I think music is an excellent de-escalator. So I can also put a link in the chat about some of the front line and some of the de-escalation stuff that they're doing.
That sounds awesome. I love that that's happening. That's really cool. Also, I was just thinking too, also just as an incentive for your fan base to give away free downloads if they show you their voter sticker or whatever, try to think of creative ways to use your music beyond having to perform, especially if because of COVID, you don't want to, leave your house or whatever. There could be other creative ways to encourage your fan base to vote and to be proud and show that they voted.
Amazing, love that. And then, so we have, right now, a lot of people are getting a lot of their information from Instagram. Are there any, recommendations of maybe getting information from places like Ballot Ready, any voter registration infographics for artists to share, any, kind of any insight for artists that just may not be able to create this information, but can share it? Any specific maybe Instagram that you guys have seen, or anything that you've seen artists share that caught your attention?
I think one of the things I always tell people, and we didn't really get into this in the discussion about voting. I'm always talking to my fan base about the importance of local elections, and following your elected officials on Twitter, on Instagram, the candidates that if you're out and you see a candidate, like follow their page and you'll see exactly what they're about. And then at the same time, because you're in that city, you'll see who else is following that candidate, and maybe that's another artist that you can then have a discussion with. And then maybe y'all can do an Instagram post with that candidate, that awesome candidate that should be winning this race. That those little things, like people, you just, they happen organically. But I always tell people, make sure you're paying attention to your local elections, because those are the things that directly affect everybody. Those are the people that are voting on, money to save your venues, that are, seeing bills that may, cut shows short or cut money from out of artists' pockets. Like that's where it's all very, very relevant and very real to the artists and to their local following.
Amazing. Did you have something you wanted to add, Erica?
Yes. So yeah, two things really quickly. Easy, you bring up a really good point. Even though like as an artist, it may be hard to, or you might want to say like, I don't want to be political, but like everything is political, like you said. Like the way we live, the way we move, the way we receive money, the way, money's distributed, all of that's political. And so it's like, none of us really have a space for us to say, oh, we're gonna like tune this out and we're not gonna be a part of this because it's impacting us or people that we know. Secondly, about graphics. So there are free graphics that can be used on votereducationweek.org, and they can be used past like this week, because this week is the end of Voter Education Week. But just using the graphics from that and just sharing that very, generic graphics just about educating people on voting and information like that. And I'll drop that in the chat as well.
Amazing.
And one last
so
quick fun thing I like to say about local elections. I'm in Baltimore, so it's a smaller city. You can run up on these people. Like, they are not hard to find. Like, they're posting when they're at the farmer's market. They're telling you when they're going to be at the mall. You know what I mean? Like, you can actually run up on these people. And that's the fun part of getting involved in politics, is actually being able to look a person in their eyes and say, hey, why did you vote against this funding last year? You know what I mean? Or, what's your position on this? You can literally, they're out there for that. And that's the fun part of following local politics.
And don't be afraid to find out who their campaign manager is. It's not intimidating at all. Like, they actually want help in bringing in voters and bringing in awareness, especially down ballot local elections, right? Like, they are looking for more volunteers, more votes, more money, all of those things. So it's not really intimidating to find out who the campaign manager is and shoot them a quick email and say, hey, I'm going to pop on Instagram Live. What are your links? Where can I send people? And then you hop on Instagram Live, you play a show, you post some links. Well, guess what? You just did some activist work, and all you did was sing some songs on Instagram Live for a half hour. So it's not hard to do.
I love that. And a clear understanding that, everybody's affected, even if you don't realize it, or you don't realize that it's in your control. So, the more research that you have, the more understanding you have of how things work, the more you can put your energy toward things that you feel would impact you and others the most. So love that insight. And I'm definitely going to start following more people on Instagram to get a better picture. Definitely. So we have like 4 minutes, and I'm going to jump into the Q&A from the audience. We've hit on a few questions as we've kind of discussed a bit of things, but we have a question from Brianna, who asks, pretty much, she has a lot of opinions about a lot of things, and people have told her she's scatterbrained. Is there any advice, or is there such thing as saturating your feed or your social media with too many things that you're passionate about, or too many things you're speaking about?
I'd say you are a multifaceted human with a lot of feelings and a lot of opinions, and if people think that you are scatterbrained, then so be it. Somebody else out there who's not speaking to you or telling you is being affected by the things you're seeing. You just maybe don't know by the things that they're seeing you post or hearing you sing about. You just might not know about it. And so I say, if you have a lot of opinions, share them. You're a human being with a lot of thoughts and feelings.
We have an artist here, one of my favorites, DDM, who he started following politics, and we watched him in real time, you know, commenting on what was going on in the country, what was going on in the nation. And he ended up having his own YouTube show now, like Secretary of Shade. He comes on, you know, at least once a week, and like thousands of people follow him and listen to him. You know what I mean? It's like, it's amazing, you know what I mean, how many people like their artists real. You know what I mean? They like them, you know, seeing and commenting on this stuff in real time. You know what I mean? And having actually had worked in politics and organizing, to see him in real time get active and see all of these people follow him, it was amazing to see. You know what I mean? I think Tina's absolutely right. Like, we're all multifaceted, we're all getting hit with this from different ways. So yeah, speak your mind, Brianna.
You can even bring that into your activist branding, like the scatterbrained activist, you know?
Yeah.
One week you talk about one issue, next week you talk about a different issue, like, use it.
Yeah.
That's good
Yeah.
feedback.
Own it.
Love that. And we also have a question from Valeria. So she says, for younger artists, how do you get your audience to take you seriously when you're spreading awareness about important issues? And kind of even more specifically getting people to vote. So like, pretty much, if this is your first time kind of speaking about something, how can you get people to believe that, you know, it's real, authentic, and take you seriously?
You're not alone. I mean, I can speak for March for Our Lives is all young people. In fact, like, even though, because I went to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, and I'm an alumni of there, and so I know a lot of the kids in March for Our Lives, or they're adults now, but they're doing amazing things, and oftentimes they like don't even want the adults to be a part of it. Like, I get there and they're like, yeah, we don't really want you to sing, you're kind of old. Do you know any younger people that want to get involved? So I would look into organizations that are youth organizations, and kind of like what Jess was saying, find your family. There are so many young people doing activist work as musicians, as visual artists, so many people that they can't vote yet, but they're spending all their time trying to, you know, voter activation. So I would say, yeah, look for those organizations that are youth organizations, because there's so many of them right now.
And again, let people see you growing and learning this stuff in real time. You know what I mean? I mean, when I first got active, one of the biggest reliefs for me was seeing people that didn't know exactly what they were doing or what was going on, and us learning this whole process together. You know, going to the state capitol for the first time with people, you know what I mean? It's like, let them see that, like, this is scary. I don't know what's happening. You know what I mean? I'm signing in, you know, let them see you like going through this in real time. So then, like, you know, like Tina said, you know, they know that they're not alone.
And also like getting involved maybe at the school level, right? So if you, in your school, is there like a way, and schools are weird, you probably have to be bipartisan for like school type things, but I would look into that too. Like, just how do you partner with other people that you actually know that have a little bit of something in them that's like, I want to kind of do this too, and start a group, you know?
Definitely love that. We have come to the end of our in session for this week. A huge thank you to you all, Tina, Jess, Erica, Easy, for offering your insight, your heart, your authentic truth, yourselves, your time to all of us. Thank you, everyone who posted questions in the Q&A, who this resonated with and kind of chimed in on the chat. Thank you all for gifting us your time. I hope that this has given you some insight around how to get started right now where you are. You will also be followed up with an email with all of this information that we put in the chat, how to get in contact with these different organizations, how to stay in touch with our panelists. So this won't be the last time you hear from us. We will be back here again on October 22nd for another in session, but we're here for you, and you guys will hear from us and get some additional information after this webinar, and this will also be available to watch again. So thank you all so much. I'm so grateful to have had this time with you all, and I hope you enjoy your amazing Thursday.
Thanks,
Bye.
Kristen B. This was awesome.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Easy. Thanks.